So basically we start out with Brazil and we start out with Portugal. And so Portugal has this king, and so he sends a bunch of people over um, to Brazil to find dye and a bunch of stuff. So we have the Portuguese and then we have the indigenous Brazilians. And so there's a division between these two, like obviously there's some wars and divisions and stuff. So there's disunity among tribes, there's really no religion, and this helped Portugal take over. So they basically came for the Brazilwood tree and its precious dye that is very expensive and valuable. And so it's being exported back to Portugal and Europe for its revenue. And so, to organize Brazil, Portugal tries the hereditary captaincies system, and so they divide Brazil into strips of land, and they distribute it amongst Portuguese noblemen who come over and rule it. And so this basically is supposed to keep other countries out, so they don't try to steal dye or whatever. But this doesn't really end up working, and they switch to a different government system that's not too far off from ours. So the Portuguese brought Roman Catholicism, which is a very, very big part of Brazil even today, and this was spread by Jesuits. So they brought African slaves over to do a bunch of manual labor, especially for the Brazilwood dye and stuff like that. So you have the Portuguese, you have African slaves, and you also have the indigenous Brazilians. So you basically have this hodgepodge of people in Brazil right now. So Brazil exports this dye to Portugal, and there's African slaves coming over to work on that. And so this is very, very good for Portugal because they have cheap labor and their economy is just great. They're making a bunch of revenue. So before imperialism, there really wasn't much religion at all, other than various tribal religions and such, and cannibalism. And this is my beautiful drawing of cannibalism. So, African people plus the tribal religions, they made this thing called Spiritism, which really isn't huge, but it's just something to note. So the benefits for Portugal, basically there was a bunch of exclusive trade, and this was very good for Portugal because they got a lot out of it. So they traded luxuries like sugar and coffee and dye. And there was also cheap labor, and this was also good for Portugal because it kept their costs down because of this cheap labor, so they were able to bring in a bunch of money, and so their economy was very, very good right now. So then we get into benefits for Brazil. And so organization was huge in Brazil, so they basically organized the government and they made a bunch of civilization in the people, and this helped them out a lot. So also the trade, they had a ton of trade and they could keep their routes even after Portugal had gone. So this was very good also. It kickstarted their economy and it just basically just helped them out. So then we get into pros and cons of imperialism. And so it spread a bunch of culture with Africans and stuff. And then there's Christianity and organization, which was huge. And also there's civilization, again, big in this. And then a lot of modern technology was brought. And also trade was huge too. They gained a lot. And both countries had economic growth with this imperialism. So then we get into cons. There's initial disagreements. That's just bound to happen. There were a couple battles and wars between Portugal and Brazil. And also loss of old culture. Not that there was much to begin with in Brazil, but it's just something. And also loss of individualism because it was forcibly taken over. So I would say, in this case, the pros would outweigh the cons, and I do think that imperialism is a good thing. Just in this case.